Hello, my name is Mira and I work as a Senior Teaching Fellow in King's Academy. We fairly recently advertised one of our core workshops on attendance because colleagues had been approaching us talking about how they were worried about falling attendance in their teaching sessions. So we offered a workshop and the irony, not enough people signed up. So we cancelled it and my colleagues have asked me to digest and condense it down into a few minutes of recorded talk instead. So this was the original outline, and what I'm going to do is hone in on, I guess, the heart of the matter, which is what influences attendance and what might we be able to do about it. So what influences attendance? Maybe an optimistic way to start is talk about why students say that they do attend. And I should say as well that the research on this seems to me to be fairly sketchy. You get fairly small scale studies, maybe in one or two disciplines. Economics is quite prevalent and so is biological sciences, but as a result we've got different facets from different contexts in these relatively small scale studies, and different methods as well. So here are some of the reasons: interaction and contact, feeling of belonging and being part of a wider community. Routine, keeping oneself on the straight and narrow, keeping the impetus and the momentum going. Easier to concentrate than other study environments, maybe at home or in the coffee shop or library. Tactical attendance, so if the session's relevant to assessment, then that might galvanise attendance. To see difficult material analysed and synthesised by the expert lecturer, and to see how the lecturer models thinking processes. They've had a good experience with that educator. And I should have said earlier, by educator, we're talking about lectures and seminars here. Most of the research is on lectures. And then the student's own academic self-concept, how they see themselves as a student, what they think their role is. So now moving on to what moderates attendance. We can divide the effects into what we might call attributes, so they're qualities of the student, and then factors to do with the environment. Attributes, unsurprisingly, health. Commitments, trades-off, these might be to do with competing academic demands, or work, paid work, employment, caring commitments. The commute, especially if that costs in time and money, whether or not the student's repeating the unit. And then what we might call traits, so their time management skills, their academic ability, and sometimes the proxy for that is their entry tariff, whether they adopt deep or surface approaches, what psychologists call Big Five personality traits, including conscientiousness. So on the environment side, we have the curriculum, so whether students find themselves interested by it, do they understand how the organisation of the module relates to their learning, their wider aims. The climate, are students comfortable in that classroom? And this might be the affective, emotional climate, first and foremost. We'll talk about the others in just a bit, the other aspects of climate. Expectations, what do students think their role is? What messages is the institution or the educator communicating? The quality of the teaching, maybe the educator themselves, the scheduling day of the week, the scheduling time of the day, whether there are clashes or scurries between rooms on campus, how students recognise that the sessions relate to assessment, And then the other aspect maybe of climate, which is the facilities and the equipment in the room, too cold, too hot, uncomfortable, etc. And then a biggie, which has been looked at quite closely in King's, whether lecture capture is sending out messages to students that their role in that session is to memorise, and they can easily do that with a recording. So what can we do? And just go through four maybe different facets that have been taken from the moderators earlier. First is lecture capture. So we might share some research evidence with students, might flag the relationship between low attendance and attainment, and the reference down in the right hand corner, they surface some of that research evidence. This is Norman Croney. It's misguided to think that you can make up for absences by binge viewing the lecture capture content during revision. Having said that, Ellie Dommett, our colleague here at King's, she found that a proportion of students who are absent from the in-person lecture never watch the lecture cast. So we have a situation there that needs some more thinking about. And we'll see later that actually giving students information about this stuff is not enough on its own to change their behaviour. There's a knowledge action gap. Suggestions for belonging. So if you think that students might feel unseen or marginalised and not mattering, then perhaps there can be some changes to how students are welcomed into the classroom, making that a little bit more explicit, being welcoming. Maybe involving all students in activities and helping everyone to learn names, not just, there's often an emphasis on the educator learning students' names, but it actually really helps with belonging if everyone learns names. So it might be through name tags at first, or the educator using students' names. Intervening and allocating students to groups, so it's not just a case of students hanging around with people they're already friends with. So this really helps some more marginalised or diffident students to get to know others. Keeping the lights on, that's related to what we've already said, so that students get a sense that what they do and say in that setting is as important as the PowerPoint. And then looking for opportunities for informal interaction. This might be before or after class, just to try and communicate that the education is less of a transaction and more of an interpersonal thing. So if you think that students are feeling exposed and anxious rather than necessarily marginalised, then some icebreakers that can be educational, not just about hobbies and things, but to do with the subject, might help students get to know each other and find shared interests. Scaffolding risks, so if you think students might not be speaking because they would feel too exposed to putting their ideas out there, then something like Poll Everywhere is a really good way to elicit student views without exposing them. And maybe it's a scaffold in that students can become more and more attributable as they become more senior. Relatedly, an ethos of failure as a finding. So if someone gets something wrong, then that is already helpful, because then they know what's not right. It's not too late to correct that, and they might have got it wrong in a really interesting way as well. So try and create a space where it is not humiliating to get things wrong. And then relatedly, this idea from Behrman and Malloy of intellectual streaking. So reducing distance through maybe the educator talks about their own failures or their own work in progress, or dead ends or difficulties, because the educators have overcome them, and students can see that they were not born perfect. Suggestions for teaching activities. Piquing curiosity beforehand, maybe with a Keats forum post or a question that people are interested in hearing each other's views on. Entry ticket, the idea of asking students to think a little bit in advance and write something down or submit something that just takes a minute to write. And that can also act as a register. Students realise that they will be missed and that the educators are taking notice of these. They also are a very good form of feedback for the educator as well. Exit tickets can work in the same way. Structured activities, practice opportunities that yield informal feedback that educators can then say you're getting feedback by turning up to this lecture. So that implies that students are doing something beyond listening. And there are many ideas in this book, Berkeley and How I Major. You'll find it in the King's Library. It's an e-book. Sometimes weirdly it's there, but it disappears from the catalogue. So if you can't find it, get in touch with me and I can give you the direct link. It's on eBook Central and we have access. Okay, and finally, suggestions for metacognition. So this is students' awareness of how they learn best. The attendance isn't the same as diligence. There are different motivation reasons for lecture absence. So a low motivation reason for lecture absence might be that they were playing computer games and couldn't get up the next day. A moderate one might be that they misjudged their deadlines and had to work through that particular session. High motivation might be a doctor's appointment. So it's not the same as diligence. We know that students don't necessarily share institutional assumptions about what's valuable in the curriculum. And there's probably, as I said, a knowledge action gap. So just telling students what's good for them is unlikely to change behaviour on its own. So how can we get students to work with this knowledge that we have about the relationship between attendance and attainment? And it is causative, as Sund and Binyu, who are referenced a little bit later, find. So students need to arrive at a shared understanding of the value of the sessions, but they need to come to their own individual commitments based on their own situations, because as we've seen, attendance is really multifactorial. Perhaps they could write or share individual pledges or codes. And that's as far as I've got with this. I'll leave you with this question. Can you think of other activities? There's a thread going on the King's Educators Network forum. If you find that, there are people who'd be very interested to hear your ideas, so please do contribute. And here are the references, so if you want to look at them at your leisure, you can pause. But I have now gone on quite long enough, so I'm going to say goodbye and thank you.